Welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're here today because we are going to look at the ultimate playbook for running and scaling a successful business. We're literally pulling back the curtain on the hidden mechanics of the business world, specifically the cost of production. If you've ever wondered why some companies just thrive while others mysteriously go belly up despite having amazing sales, well, you're in exactly the right place. We're going to decode the precise financial and economic rules that dictate whether a business survives or fails.
Okay, let's dive into this. I want you to imagine right now that you just quit your day job to start your own company. You pour your absolute heart and soul into it. At the end of the year, you look at the money that came in, you subtract what you spent on materials, and hey, there's cash left over. You're profitable, right? Time to buy that yacht? Well, you might want to hold off on that for a second. I really want to challenge your basic understanding of what true profit actually is, because what your bank account tells you and what the real economics tell you might be two entirely different stories.
So that brings us to the first stage of the entrepreneur's journey. Section 1, the true meaning of profit. To figure out if your business is surviving or just slowly bleeding money without you even realizing it, we first have to fully grasp our costs. And there are two very distinct types we're dealing with here. On one side, we have explicit costs. These are the super obvious ones. It's the input costs that require a direct outlay of money. When you literally write a check to pay your rent or buy raw materials or pay your employees, those are explicit costs. But then there are implicit costs. These are your opportunity costs, and they do not require you to hand over actual cash. For example, if you quit a cushy, well-paying job to start this business, the salary you walked away from is an implicit cost. You aren't writing a check for it, but believe me, it is a massive cost to your overall wealth. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly why economists and accountants view your business so differently. On the right, notice how an accountant only looks at your explicit revenues minus your explicit costs to calculate your accounting profit. It's pretty straightforward. But on the left side, an economist is looking at the entire picture. To calculate your economic profit, they subtract both your explicit costs and your implicit costs from your revenue. Because economists include all those hidden opportunity costs, your economic profit is literally always going to be smaller than your accounting profit. Let's look at a real-world example to really lock this in. Meet Saramal. He had a solid job offer for 30,000 rupees, but he turned it down to start his own company. His initial revenue was 175,000 rupees. His explicit costs, paying his employees, buying materials, making rent, came out to 97,000 rupees. So his accountant enthusiastically tells him, hey, you made a profit of 78,000 rupees. But the economist steps in, reminds Saramal about that 30,000 rupee job he gave up, and subtracts that implicit cost. So Saramal's true economic profit is actually only 48,000 rupees. That is the number that tells him if he actually made the right choice. Now that we know how to measure true profit, let's jump to section 2, short run versus long run. I want you to completely drop your normal definition of time here, because in economics, time isn't about days or months or years. It is entirely about your flexibility to change. In business economics, the short run is a constrained period where some of your inputs are completely fixed. Think of it like this. If you sign a 1-year lease on a small factory, you're stuck with that factory size for the entire year. Sure, you can hire a few more people, but you can't exactly knock down the walls to make the building bigger tomorrow. The long run, on the other hand, is a completely flexible period where absolutely every input is variable. You can build a new factory, buy crazy new machines, or entirely restructure your operation. So just remember, the short run is about constraint, and the long run is about total flexibility. But living in that constrained short run creates a major headache. That brings us to section 3, the productivity trap. Imagine your factory is absolutely crushing it, so you decide to hire a new worker. Boom, productivity goes up. So you hire another, and then another. But soon you have so many workers that they are literally bumping elbows on the assembly line. Because your factory size is fixed in the short run, you start getting this massive traffic jam on the factory floor. Workers are just waiting around to use the same machinery. It's the economic equivalent of having way too many cooks in a tiny kitchen. Suddenly, your output isn't rising anywhere near as fast as it was before. So the crucial point is explained by the law of diminishing marginal productivity. This law basically states that as you add more of a variable input, like your workers, to an existing fixed input, like your small factory, after a certain point, the additional output you get from each new worker is eventually going to fall. Simply hiring more people doesn't magically mean you get proportionately more output. At a certain point, they honestly just start getting in each other's way. Knowing that, how do we track the financial impact? Section 4. Calculating your daily costs. Let's break down the alphabet soup of economic costs so you can track literally every penny. The absolute foundation of your daily expenses are your fixed costs, or FC. These are costs that are already spent and simply cannot be changed in the short run. Whether your factory produces 10,000 units today or absolutely 0 units, you still have to pay your fixed costs. The landlord doesn't care if you had a slow day. The rent is due regardless.
Layered right on top of that are your variable costs, or VC. These are the costs that change directly as your output changes. We're talking worker wages, raw materials, electricity to run the machines. As you ramp up your production to meet surging customer demand, your variable costs are naturally going to increase right alongside it.
Finally, to get your ultimate daily financial picture, you just add them together. Your total costs, or TC, is the absolute sum of your variable costs and your fixed costs. It's a super simple equation, TC equals VC plus FC. This is the grand total of what it literally takes to keep the lights on and the products moving out the door. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing how the math comes to life. Notice that straight horizontal line at $50, that is your fixed cost. It never wavers, no matter the quantity. Then that orange line curving upwards is your variable cost, growing as you produce more stuff. And look at the gray total cost curve. It floats perfectly above the variable cost curve. The gap between them is exactly $50 at every point, representing that unwavering fixed cost. It's just a beautiful visual representation of how your business is spending money. So, you've basically mastered the short run. Let's look to the future. Section 5, the reality of scaling. We're entering the real climax of this journey, talking about building an absolute empire in the long run. Scaling up means completely shedding your fixed constraints. When you make long-run decisions, you are totally reimagining your business size and structure. Because you're no longer trapped by a tiny fixed factory, the law of diminishing marginal productivity actually no longer holds you back in the same way. All of your inputs are completely variable now. You can build 5 new, massive factories if you want to. Firms make these choices entirely based on the expected costs and the usefulness of these new massive inputs. Let's move to and see how this builds, because this is pretty cool. Notice this wide, smooth, U-shaped curve spanning all the way across the chart. This is your long-run average total cost curve, or LRATC. We call this the envelope curve because it literally envelopes all of those smaller, U-shaped, short-run curves you see inside it. As you grow, you basically jump from one short-run factory size to the next, slightly bigger one. The long-run curve is essentially just a collection of all your best short-run decisions seamlessly stitched together over time. Now that downward slope on the left side of that big envelope curve, that is the absolute holy grail of business. This is called economies of scale. It happens when your long-run average total costs actually decrease as your output increases. This is the sweet spot of scaling. You're buying your materials in massive bulk, you're using hyper-specialized machinery, and as a result, getting bigger actually makes your business significantly more cost-effective per unit. But you really gotta beware the right side of the curve. If a business grows too massive, you hit diseconomies of scale. This is where average costs start to spike right back up. Why? Well, because managing a monstrous global corporation is incredibly expensive. Monitoring costs just skyrocket as you hire layers upon layers of middle management just to keep track of everyone. And even worse, team spirit and morale can absolutely plummet when employees feel like they're just a tiny, invisible cog in a giant corporate machine. Productivity falls, and your costs rise. So how do you ensure you scale correctly without falling into that trap? You really have to understand the difference between technical efficiency and economic efficiency. Technical efficiency is an engineering mindset. It's about using the absolute fewest physical inputs possible to make something, regardless of the price tag. But economic efficiency is the true business mindset. It's all about producing that same output at the absolute lowest possible cost. Honestly, being the most technically advanced, cutting-edge firm in the world simply doesn't matter to your survival if it isn't also the cheapest way to produce your goods. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with that exact thought. Take a really hard look at the hidden mechanics of your own business endeavors, or even just your own side projects. You might be brilliant, you might have the best technology, the smartest team, and incredible technical efficiency. But when you factor in those hidden implicit opportunity costs, when you look at your fixed constraints and your true economies of scale, you might be technically efficient, but are you economically efficient? Answering that question is the ultimate key to business survival. Thank you so much for joining me to explore the cost of production, and I will see you next time.